The state of Mississippi is trying to reshape the narrative on the Nolan Wells death? Really?
In the last week of July, federal investigators arrested a man in California. His alleged crime, making threats against a sitting judge in Mississippi. That judge has never ruled on the Nolan Wells case. She's never issued a warrant in it, never so much as commented on it in an official capacity. Her connection is simpler than that, and stranger. Her son is one of the last people who says he saw Nolan alive. That same week, 200 miles away, a college student hired a lawyer, not because he's a suspect, but because strangers online decided he was one, based on nothing more than the fact that he stopped to help tow a stranded boat back to shore on July 4th. And on national television, when Nolan's own stepfather was asked directly about the young man who's been speaking publicly for his son for the past 2 weeks, he said flatly that he didn't know him. None of that happened on the 4th of July. All of it happened in the last 7 days. If you've followed this case from the beginning, you already know how Nolan disappeared. What you're about to hear is what's happened since, and at this point, it's less one investigation than 4 separate fires burning across the same county. A judge under federal protection, a bystander lawyering up, a family publicly doubting its own son's friend group, and underneath all of it, still completely unanswered, what actually happened to Nolan Wells? Quick ask before we get into it. We've covered this case since the first week it broke, and most of what you're about to hear hasn't been on this channel yet. If you want the next update the moment it's confirmed, subscribing is what makes sure you see it. Now, here's where things stand. Before any of that, the judge, the lawsuits, the arrest, there's a shorter, simpler fact this case keeps threatening to bury under paperwork. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, and by every account, from the people who knew him, he was good at making other people feel like they mattered. He was a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, home in Ocean Springs for the 4th of July weekend, before he was due back at school to start training for the coming football season. His high school coach, Tracy Lampley, remembers him as a happy-go-lucky kid with a big smile that everybody adored and loved. Photos from the boat that day show him doing what friends say he always did, arms slung around whoever was standing next to him, laughing for the camera, taking up the middle of a group instead of its edge. He was one of 6 children raised by Christine Wansley, a family medicine nurse practitioner who has spent her career on the other side of exactly the kind of conversation she now finds herself having about her own son. Nolan grew up alongside a sister and 4 brothers, in a house he didn't tend to leave without someone else coming along. That detail, that Nolan wasn't someone who typically went places alone or left people behind, is going to matter in a few minutes. Keep it in mind. For anyone catching up, Nolan went out to Horn Island, a barrier island reachable only by boat, with a group of friends on July 4th. Their boat took on water. Around 4 that afternoon, someone aboard called a private towing company. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources later released that call. Over hold music and commotion in the background, a teenage voice comes on the line, gives their position at the west tip of the island, and says simply, "We're sinking, can y'all please come?" That call got the boat towed home. Nolan wasn't on it when it left.
Detail assistance, Vicky speaking. How can I help you?
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can you all please come? We have a membership.
All right, of course. How far is the work coming up, sir? Can you give me a description? Ankles? Hello?
Hey.
Yes. How far is the water coming up, sir?
It's coming up. We're just sinking. I don't know. Like we're going down now.
All right. Well, let's get you going. Membership number or phone number listed on the account, sir.
I don't know the phone number. It's either. I think it's. Try that.
All right.
I know we have a membership, like guaranteed. I don't have the tag on here.
Unless you have a membership number or anything, it's okay. I'll get you over to the captain. What's the best phone number to reach you at?
Reach me at
You are hearing the audio distress call from the boat. That is the boat on which Nolan Wells went to Horn Island. Now, there have been a lot of different accounts about whether he was on the boat when he came back from Horn Island, when he was supposed to come back from Horn Island. He never came back from Horn Island. And you can clearly hear on that version, which we obtained from the Mississippi Department of Marine Research. They released it. It's not something off TikTok or Insta. And that's what you hear.
His mother reported him missing that night. 2 days later, on July 6th, a National Park Service ranger found his body in the water off the island's northwestern tip. GPS records later showed the boat didn't actually leave Horn Island until 4:31 that afternoon, roughly 90 minutes after Nolan was last confirmed seen around 3 o'clock. That gap, and the question of who was actually aboard when the boat left, is what turned a tragedy into a case nobody's willing to close. Investigators still haven't offered a public, minute-by-minute account of what happened during those 90 minutes. It could have an entirely ordinary explanation: gathering belongings, waiting on a tow that took time to arrive, keeping track of dozens of people spread across a crowded beach. It could just as easily be the natural mess of reconstructing exact minutes from a chaotic afternoon, weeks after the fact. Nobody involved, not the friends, not the sheriff's office, not the family's own investigators, has laid those 90 minutes out in detail on the record. Until someone does, it remains one of the more concrete, document-backed open questions in a case that otherwise runs largely on second-hand accounts. The search for him, in the 2 days between his disappearance and the discovery of his body, was not small. It grew to include the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, and volunteer groups including the United Cajun Navy. It also ran into real, physical obstacles. Marine Resources records show the agency's first drone launch, around 10 that first morning, was grounded by a software glitch nobody could fix in the field. A second attempt ended when a drone's overheated battery separated mid-flight. Further flights were cancelled because of the heat. None of that is a story about anyone failing Nolan. It's a story about how hard it is to search open Gulf water, even with every available agency trying. That's the part you already know. Here's the part that's new. On July 20th, hundreds of people gathered at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs to say goodbye to him. Reverend Al Sharpton officiated at the family's request. Filmmaker Tyler Perry, who has said Nolan's case echoes his own unanswered questions about a nephew who died in a Louisiana prison, covered the funeral costs. Media mogul Byron Allen separately donated $100,000 to the family's fund. It was, by any measure, an enormous public outpouring for a family that, 3 weeks earlier, had never expected to be organizing a funeral for their 18-year-old son at all. In the weeks around that funeral, 2 viral pieces of media briefly became the center of this entire case, and 2 separate friends stepped forward to explain them. The first was a video appearing to show a heated argument near the water. A voice on it sounded, to a lot of people, including Ben Crump, the family's attorney, like Nolan himself, demanding his phone back. A young man named Trayston Shepard came forward and said the voice was his, not Nolan's. He said he'd gotten into an unrelated altercation with someone outside his friend group, and that Nolan doesn't appear in the footage at all. The second was a photo. Nolan at a pool party, which some accounts online tried to use as proof he'd survived Horn Island and died somewhere else, days later. Independently obtained metadata showed the photo was taken on June 27th, over a week before he ever went to the island. Shepard confirmed the date and the people in it. That theory collapsed on contact with the evidence. Then, in late July, a second friend, Warren Hudson, sat down for 2 separate interviews with a YouTube channel run by former police officer Brandon Tatum, the second one filmed on Horn Island itself. Hudson described how the day unfolded. A small group at first, then, in his telling, 50 or more people arriving around them, until it turned into essentially one large party spread across the island. Drinking was happening broadly through that crowd, Hudson said, Nolan included, and he described it as an unremarkable part of a normal 4th of July rather than anything anyone was hiding. Somewhere in the middle of that crowd, Hudson says, their boat started taking on water. He described a genuine scramble to save the boat, insisting nobody simply abandon Nolan, that Nolan made his own choice to stay behind with the girl he'd been spending the afternoon with, a choice Hudson says she witnessed firsthand. Hudson has also said he's the one who first called Nolan's family that night to tell them their son hadn't come home, the call that, by most accounts, set the search in motion.
Nolan was like a brother to me. Nolan lit up every room he walked in. 4th of July, everybody was out there. Nolan rode out on the Triton, and then we had a Palm Beach, 18 Palm Beach. There was 4 guys on that. The rest of the group, which was probably ranged from maybe 10 to 15 or 16 people on my buddy's tide line.
Yeah, so y'all pretty much having a good. So you guys get ready to leave out of there, you're getting towed out.
Yeah.
And then where's Nolan in this situation?
Well, the last time I saw Nolan was 3 o'clock. And Nolan was cradling a girl in his arms, Katie. Katie. And Katie, Nolan was sitting there, and the last time I saw him, I looked at Nolan, and Nolan was like shaking his head, laughing, and I was like, dude, you crazy. I was like just joking with him. And, but anyway, Nolan, that was the last time I laid eyes on him. But when we were leaving, obviously, no one is getting left at the island that came with us unless they demanded to, be there and asked, this is a very common thing at Horn Island. When you're out there, a lot of people ride out there with someone and in with somebody else all the time. I've done that 100 times. It's a very common thing, but, Nolan was sitting by the boat with that Katie girl, and my buddy yelled for Nolan, get on the boat. We're leaving. The boat's having issues. And no, he didn't say that, but he was panicking. Nolan, get the F on the boat. Get on the boat. And Nolan said, no, I'm staying out here. I'm going to ride in with somebody else. And it's not uncommon to hear, but it's not like my buddy asked him one time. My buddy asked Nolan multiple times to get on the boat. Nolan, get on the boat. Get on the boat. We're leaving. If you're coming, you got to come now. And Nolan made a decision to stay out on the island. And like he said,
how many people heard that?
At least 5 everyone that was on.
For a while, that was where this story sat. 2 friends, 2 clarifications, one increasingly specific account of Nolan's last known decision, with drinking folded in as an unremarkable fact of a holiday on the water, rather than anything anyone was hiding. Then, less than 2 weeks ago, that account started coming apart. Not from the internet this time, from Nolan's own family. On a national news broadcast, anchor Chris Cuomo asked Nolan's stepfather directly about Trayston Shepard, the same young man who'd gone on the record to clear his own name in the viral video. The stepfather said he didn't recognize him. Pushed on whether Shepard could really have been close with Nolan, he compared it to a stranger parking in someone's driveway. Proximity isn't the same thing as friendship. Brandon Tatum, who conducted the original interview, didn't let that go unanswered. On a separate program, he said Shepard had shown him photos of the 2 of them together at prom and described Shepard giving Nolan rides to school on multiple occasions. Tatum said Shepard had gotten visibly emotional off-camera talking about Nolan and questioned why a family would deny knowing someone who seemed to have real history with their son. To his credit, Tatum also said something else. He doesn't personally know either family well enough to say who's telling the truth. It isn't only Shepard's version being quietly complicated. Katie herself, the young woman multiple friends say Nolan stayed behind with, has been described through her family as remembering something slightly different than Hudson's account suggests. Her sister told the Daily Mail that Katie assumed Nolan was getting ready to board the boat he'd arrived on, and that Katie assumed the friends calling for him wouldn't actually have left without him. That's a meaningfully different picture than Nolan decided to stay. It reads closer to, Nolan intended to go, and something in between changed that. Katie has since been publicly identified by name in national coverage, information her own family didn't put out, and that she hasn't confirmed or spoken to herself. She's now one of the most searched, most speculated about names attached to this entire case, and the only thing anyone has from her, in her own words, is nothing at all. Here's why a disagreement over who was friends with whom and what exactly Katie assumed matters. Shepard's account is the reason the viral argument video stopped being treated as Nolan's last known moment on tape. Hudson's account is the reason Nolan chose to stay behind, exists in the public record at all. Katie's account, filtered second-hand through her family, complicates that same framing from a third direction. If the Wells family's skepticism about even knowing these young men gains any traction, it doesn't just cast doubt on two individuals. It puts a question mark over the three pieces of testimony currently doing the most work to explain Nolan's final hour.
Me right now, special guest Brandon Tatum. He is a former police officer with Tucson PD, and he is a star of The Officer Tatum on YouTube. He has interviewed Nolan's friends. Now, we're about to bring on two experts, each one taking a different viewpoint on that call. But, Officer Tatum, thank you for being with us tonight. No matter what you say, just know you're going to get hate mail. Doesn't matter what you say. If the angel Gabriel came down right now and spoke on this case, he would get hate mail. That said, what do you make of that audio, officer?
Well, Nancy, thank you so much for having me on. If you put the audio within context, it is an impossibility unless these people are prophesying that somehow they're saying Nolan's name or projecting that Nolan is somehow injured, hurt, or killed, because we have witnesses that have come out. When I interviewed Warren, a lot of those kids that I talked to already alluded to this way before the audio came out, that they were gone. And people had already saw Nolan after they had left. The young lady, Katie, that he was hanging out with, I saw a text message from her alluding to the fact that she never saw him get on that boat at all. We have video of the boat that we shared on our social media page, and it shows all the occupants on the boat, and Nolan was not there. And so if a person thinks that they've heard something on the audio, they have to compare it with context. Maybe they said, "Is it dead?" talking about items that could potentially have died or damaged on the boat, given the fact that they were sinking. So I think people need to put this in context and reevaluate what they're listening to on the video, because if you are going to make a staunch stance in the wrong direction, in my opinion, by saying they're obviously talking about Nolan, it is incredibly impossible. One more thing real quick, that when you look at where they were at when they made the phone call and their GPS coordinates, it literally put them on the island. And we know, and not on the physical island, but really close proximity to the island. And we know, because we have another video of Nolan being out there and also all the other boats surrounding him, that this would have had to happen very near to hundreds of people in hundreds of different boats. So somebody would have seen something if there was a dramatic commotion like this occurring on that boat.
I hear what you're saying, Officer Brandon Tatum. That last part that you said, that there were hundreds of people around and they would have seen what happened, that part, I disagree with that. John Mobley joining us. Crimes happen all the time in a crowded area and nobody sees anything. Either they say they didn't see anything, or they really didn't see anything, because it all blends in, right? It all blends in. And again, we don't know what happened. We don't know why Nolan Wells has a red mark on the back of his occipital. We don't know. Was he hit? Did he fall? Then fall off a boat? It could have been any number of things. Some nefarious, some an accident, some negligent. My point is, just because there's a lot of people around, that does not guarantee you witnesses, Mobley. You know that better than anybody with all the cases you've tried.
Well, Nancy, I got to call it like I see it. I think there are two things I want to say to address that. The first part, I would agree with you that yes, you know, a lot of people can be around and they can notice something, and something can happen rather, and people not see it. However, I think the way that the human mind works, we would all agree, is we perceive things all the time, okay? And we may perceive something that at the time we perceive it, it is not deemed significant. However, in this case, I do believe that if someone did see something that they didn't pay particular attention to involving Nolan Wells, once all of this has come out, the way the mind works is it'll trigger what they saw before, because now it becomes significant. Okay, so I do agree that people can perceive things and not pay attention to them, but when something significant happens later, sort of like being robbed, you know, you're not paying attention to what everybody's wearing, but if that when somebody robs you and later on you have to recall what that person was wearing, what they looked like, you can recall it because it's important at that point. But at the time they perceived it, it was not important. So that's what I want to make sure I discuss. And I do want to address, you talk about the red mark on the back of his head. I mean, I think that is a red herring. That's something that everybody kind of latched onto because they're so desperate for any information that might be related to the cause of his death. But even the only pathologist that conducted the autopsy did not
him up. Mobley, are you a medical doctor? Yes, no.
I know how to examine forensic evidence based on the countless homicides that I've tried.
Listening, not hearing, yes, no. You're not a medical doctor.
I'm a juris doctor.
Are you a medical examiner?
I am not.
No. Put up the back diagram, the back of the head of Nolan Wells from the second autopsy right now. You know what? I give it to you, Mobley. You're a great trial lawyer. A medical examiner.
That doesn't mean any of these three people is lying. Families don't always know every name in a teenager's phone, and a mother and stepfather sorting through hundreds of strangers claiming closeness to their dead son online have real reason to be cautious about anyone showing up on camera. Memory under pressure is also unreliable in ways that have nothing to do with dishonesty. Three people standing in three different spots on a crowded beach can walk away with three different, sincerely held accounts of the same 20 minutes. It also doesn't mean the family is wrong to ask. Investigators haven't said publicly whether any of these accounts are under particular scrutiny. Sit with what that requires of a family, verifying, in public, in real time, whether the people narrating their son's last afternoon on Earth are even people he knew. That's not a task grief usually asks of anyone. What it comes down to is this. For weeks, the most detailed account of Nolan's decision to stay on Horn Island came from young men, and a second-hand account of a young woman that the public narrative was built around. As of the last 2 weeks, the family at the center of this story says it isn't sure it actually knows who two of them even are. We'll come back to why that matters, for where this case goes next. First, there's the half of this story science was supposed to settle, and didn't. On July 22nd, at the NACS National Convention in Chicago, Ben Crump stood at a podium and read from a report the family had waited 3 weeks for. The independent autopsy, commissioned by Nolan's family and funded in part by Colin Kaepernick, had reached its conclusion. Cause and manner of death, undetermined, pending investigation. Not drowning, not homicide. To understand why undetermined isn't a dodge, you have to understand what the examiner, Dr. Roger Mitchell, actually had in front of him. By the time Mitchell performed his exam on July 10th, Nolan had already spent 2 days in Gulf Coast water before recovery, and more time decomposing in Mississippi heat after that. He'd also already been through 1 full autopsy by the state medical examiner's office, performed the day after his body was found. Mitchell's report noted something forensic pathologists consider routine, but which became central to his entire finding. Portions of Nolan's neck structures and organs, the exact tissue examiners used to determine whether someone drowned, had been retained by the state's office rather than sent along with the body. Without direct access to the airway, the lungs, or the stomach contents, Mitchell wrote that he couldn't confirm whether water had entered Nolan's lungs and couldn't rule out injury to the neck as a contributing factor. He did find something new, red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head. He couldn't say what caused it.
Talking about the skin, we're talking about the subcu fat, we're talking about the musculature that's under there, and yes, there is musculature under there. And what his conclusion is, Nancy, is that there's significant decomposition at this point in time, so he cannot make a determination about these markings one way or another. He needs more information, and admittedly, in this second autopsy, he says this is pending investigation, and that's key here.
Okay. Joe Scott Morgan.
Yes.
He, the first medical examiner, removed the throat.
Yes.
No other part of the body, except for the lungs, removed the throat and the lungs. We know why he took the lungs. I don't have to be a death investigator like yourself with 10,000 death investigations under my belt to know why he took the lungs, to see if Nolan drowned. But the fact that someone has a lungs full of water does not tell me how they got in the water. Did he fall? Was he hit? Was he held under? Was it an accident? Did you see that video? Pull it up if you can, control room, of all those ships, all those boats out there. If he was between one of those boats, lost his footing, went under, got the riptide, no one may have noticed. All right? No one may have noticed. Look at all that. And there were apparently 300 or so people out there. This is just a tiny microcosm. It's July the 4th. Everybody's at Horn Island having a good time. So it could be any number of ways he landed under the water. But my point is, that's why they took the lungs. Why the throat?
Well, because the throat and the throat area, as you're referring to it as, it's actually the organs of the neck. We're talking about the larynx, the pharynx, our windpipe, essentially, and everything else that's connected therein. That's the conveyance to get into the lungs. So one of the things that what they're looking at here, Nancy, to put it very bluntly, is they're looking for any possibility that his breathing could have been compromised. Well, how is that compromised? Well, when you begin to think about, if you put your hand in the midline of your throat, right here, okay, you begin to think about the trachea, which is encompassed right here. Was it compromised in any way? Are there any focal areas of hemorrhage? Has it been crushed? You would go up into the neck. I suspect that the tongue was probably removed as well. You're going to look at the hyoid, which, did not accompany the body. But all of this has been retained. There's nothing abnormal about the state retaining the organs of the neck. This happens very, very frequently in cases like this because they want to be able to go back and examine it. And also for the future, they either want to get a consult on it or it has evidentiary probative value here.
2 outside forensic pathologists with no connection to the case helped the public understand what that means. Dr. Judy Melinek explained why the discoloration alone doesn't settle anything. It can come from a lot of different sources, she said, and in a body that's already decomposing, it can simply be decomposition itself, not evidence of trauma. Dr. Michelle Dupree, a former medical examiner, made a related point about the exam as a whole. Working from tissue that's already been through one autopsy hampers what a second examiner can determine, not because anyone's hiding anything, but because there's simply less left to work with the second time. Dupree went further, calling Jackson County's early no-foul play read of the case premature, arguing that nobody is in a position to know until a full investigation runs its course. A third expert, Dr. Carl Wigren, put the underlying problem even more bluntly. There's no single medical finding that can reliably prove whether a person was conscious or unconscious, or entered the water on their own, or because of someone else, once decomposition and a prior autopsy have already taken key tissue out of play. Crump made a related point at that same podium, in his own words. The real question was never simply how Nolan died in the water. It's what condition he was in before he ever entered it, conscious or not, forced or not. Those questions, Crump said, are the actual center of this case, and as of the independent autopsy, they remained open. It's worth sitting for a moment on how far that is, from where this case started.
That mean that Nolan Wells was found floating face down and fully clothed. I'm a forensic scientist and a former CSI. There is new information about how Nolan Wells' body was recovered. One of the people who was involved in the recovery of his remains has gone on Nancy Grace and to a couple of other news outlets, and he was saying that Nolan was found face down and fully clothed. Fully clothed I don't totally understand, because in all of the pictures Nolan was wearing only his swim trunks. It's not clear to me what he meant by fully clothed. If he meant he was fully clothed in his swim trunks, or if he means that he put on a shirt. That is not clear to me. What I do want to talk about a little bit more in depth is this face down part, because I've seen a lot of confusion about what that means, that he was found floating face down. And essentially, it means nothing. It is very well documented in the literature that most bodies that are found from water are found floating face down. This is so common that it is called the drowning position. This is a position where the anterior aspect, that's the front of your body, faces the bottom of the body of water, and then your extremities, like your arms and legs and your head, will be pointed down towards the ground or the bottom of whatever body of water you're in. When a body is floating, sometimes they come totally to the surface, so their back is above the waterline. Sometimes they're just underneath the top of the water. This can be highly dependent on how decomposed the body is, because as is noted in that same article, putrefaction can cause the body to rise. So as putrefaction, decomposition progresses and gases are formed from the bacterial activity inside of your body, which is a natural process, the body will typically surface because it's more buoyant, unless it is entangled in something like, for example, sticks and leaves and logs and the other things that we see at the bottom of lakes and rivers and stuff like that. And in a situation like when you're in the Gulf of Mexico, which is where Nolan was, a strong current or a rough sea state can cause the remains to strike up against underground obstructions, for example, rocks, logs, etc. And that same rescuer who said he was found face down and fully clothed did note that there are very strong currents out there, and he called it a washing machine effect, where everything is getting swirled around. So this headline is not shocking to me, the fact that he was found face down. The fully clothed, I don't totally understand. I have not seen any information where this person clarified what they meant by fully clothed. If they meant he put a shirt on, or if he just means he was clothed normally in his swim trunks, which is what he was reported to be wearing that day.
I've questioned multiple actual medical examiners, actual doctors that say that means something. Put him up again. In what world would the first medical examiner remove Nolan's throat if it did not have something probative about it, something that proves something? Did they remove his toe? No. His elbow? No. His eyeball? His nose? No. They took his throat. Do not tell me that a medical doctor, which you are not, took a throat out of this young man because it means nothing? Nothing. That doctor is not grabbing at straws, as Mobley said. I don't know why he's saying that.
No, you're right. He has purpose. We have purpose in everything that we do in the medical legal world. And so when you see this highlighted area, it's unique in the way he has diagrammed it here. He even demonstrates that it has almost like margins to it. And, that's what has left a big question for us, because it's not like it's diffuse all over the place where you've got these kind of spotty alignments. He's got a margin. It almost looks like a rectangle, doesn't it? Well, when we begin to see things like that, we think about patterns. And that's some of the questions that have yet to be answered. But what he does say in his relative to the second examination is that he did a multi-layered dissection. Now, this area had not been dissected by the ME's office.
On the day Nolan's body was found, Jackson County's coroner said there were no immediately obvious signs of trauma, and the sheriff's office said there was no reason at that point to suspect foul play. That was the entire working theory for a while, a tragic, ordinary drowning. 3 weeks and 1 independent autopsy later, no reason to suspect foul play had become cannot rule out non-accidental factors from a board-certified pathologist reading directly off the family's own report. Whatever eventually turns out to be true, that's a real documented shift, not a matter of interpretation. Then, on July 31st, something shifted that hasn't been fully explained either. Officials confirmed the state's own autopsy, the one from early July, the one holding the tissue Mitchell never got to examine, is now complete. But it isn't public. District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath has said the report will stay sealed until it's presented to a grand jury, calling that standard procedure for any unnatural or suspicious death in Jackson County. So somewhere in a state office in Mississippi sits a completed autopsy that may answer questions Mitchell's exam physically couldn't. Neither the public, nor by some accounts even Nolan's family, has seen it yet. That's where the science stands. Undetermined on one side, complete but sealed on the other. And while both of those reports sat waiting, something else entirely caught fire, starting with a stranger who says all he did was help. His name is Bart Edmiston Jr. He wasn't on Nolan's boat. By his family's account, and according to what his attorney has said publicly, he was one of hundreds of people on Horn Island that day when he noticed a boat taking on water and helped tow it back toward shore. That's the entire documented basis for his connection to this case. A decision to help. The same instinct that, told a different way, could have made him one of the people this story praises rather than one it interrogates. Instead, in the weeks since, Edmiston says he's been accused online of helping cause Nolan's death and taking part in a cover-up. Some of that suspicion traces back to an unfounded rumor that Edmiston had some prior romantic connection to Katie, the same young woman Nolan is said to have stayed behind with, and that the connection gave him a motive. His attorney, Russell Latino, has directly denied it. He says an old high school photo circulating online does show Edmiston with a young woman, but not Katie, and that Edmiston didn't know who she was before Nolan's death. It's a small, useful illustration of how this case's information vacuum works. A photo, a guess, and a theory can travel a lot further than anyone bothers to check whether the person in the picture is even the person being discussed. Latino calls the broader claims against Edmiston entirely fabricated and says Edmiston has cooperated with investigators from the start, sitting for interviews, handing over his phone, his boat, and his GPS data without being asked twice. According to the family, no law enforcement agency has ever identified him as a suspect. On July 29th, Latino sent a 5-page cease and desist letter to a social media personality named Kimbra Lee, accusing her of publishing Edmiston's home address, photos of his house, property records, and details about where his family works. Latino says that information exposed Edmiston and his relatives to real physical danger, not just online criticism. The letter demanded she stop, preserve what she'd already posted as potential evidence, and issue a public retraction. According to the letter, Edmiston had already received what his attorney called a credible death threat, serious enough to be reported to both state and federal authorities. Latino didn't stop at one letter. He's told reporters he expects to send more, and the Edmiston family says it's now working with a private investigative firm to identify others they believe have defamed their son. In a statement, the family said they'd tried to stay quiet out of respect for the Wells family for as long as they could, but that the attacks made silence impossible. Edmiston isn't the only person this case has quietly damaged who had nothing to do with what happened in the water. Christine Wansley, the mother demanding answers in the first place, has spent the last several weeks fighting a different kind of attack. Supporters say her professional profile, tied to her work as a nurse practitioner, was flooded with one-star reviews during the exact stretch when she was burying her son. Around the same time, she posted publicly that hate mail had started arriving at her home in the days before Nolan's funeral. Neither she nor her employer has confirmed the full scope of either, and it hasn't been independently verified how many of those reviews were even real. What isn't in dispute is that a woman looking for answers about her son's death has become, in the process, a target herself. That's on top of the AI-generated videos falsely impersonating her that were already circulating by mid-July. Here's why a bystander's legal fight and a mother's workplace reviews matter to a case that isn't really about either of them. This is what happens when an information vacuum meets a national audience with no official record to check itself against. The state's autopsy is sealed. The DA won't discuss evidence. Investigators aren't publicly confirming or ruling out anyone. Into that silence, social media has been filling in names and motives on its own, and the people absorbing the consequences increasingly aren't the people the investigation is actually about. On July 20th, the same day as Nolan's funeral, attorneys representing the Wells family sent letters to friends of Nolan's and some of their relatives, instructing them not to delete any records connected to the case and signaling an intent to pursue litigation. Those letters came from Mississippi attorney Gary Bufkin, working alongside Ben Crump, who is also representing Christine Wansley in her role as administrator of Nolan's estate. Around the same time, new subpoenas went out on Wansley's behalf, not for one platform, but 6: Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat, TikTok, and the location tracking app Life 360. That last one matters specifically. It's the app Wansley has said she used to locate Nolan's phone in the first place, at a friend's house, days after he went missing, the same phone she and her sister later said had no saved Snapchat content from July 4th at all, despite Nolan being someone who documented everything. Whether that missing content turns out to be an app simply clearing old posts on its own schedule, or something else entirely, is still an open question. The subpoenas represent the family's legal team trying to answer it definitively across every platform at once, instead of taking anyone's word for what is or isn't still recoverable. Meanwhile, attorney Eric Hertz, leading the independent side of this investigation alongside Crump, has said his team is working with ocean engineering experts to understand how and why Nolan's body ended up in almost the exact location he was last seen alive. Hertz has confirmed his team is fielding more than 100 calls a day from people connected to Horn Island that day. He also says he believes the FBI will be present for the joint phone inspection his team has been negotiating with the district attorney's office, an inspection that, as of the most recent update, remains only a tentative agreement, not a scheduled event. That inspection matters more than its procedural framing suggests. Right now, competing claims about Nolan's phone, whether Snapchat content was deleted, when, and by whom, exist only as dueling assertions between the family's team and whatever the friend group has said. A joint forensic review, done once, with both sides' experts and the FBI in the room, is the one mechanism currently on the table that could actually settle that question instead of leaving it to argue itself out online indefinitely. Separately, Warren Hudson's father, a physician named Dr. Benjamin Hudson, has put up a $50,000 reward of his own for information about what happened to Nolan. It's one more sign of how many people connected to this case, on every side of it, say they're after the same answer. And then there's the arrest. Court documents show a man named Joseph Dumas from California was arrested for making a threat on social media directed at a sitting Mississippi judge, Chancery Court Judge Ashley Cole. Cole has no official role in the Wells investigation. She hasn't ruled on it, hasn't presided over any part of it, isn't attached to the DA's office pursuing it. Her connection is entirely personal. Her son is Warren Hudson, the same friend who told Brandon Tatum that Nolan chose to stay behind on the island that afternoon. Mississippi's Department of Public Safety has confirmed the FBI is now investigating threats made against public officials, potential witnesses, and people connected to the friend group who were on Horn Island that day. The department's commissioner, Sean Tyndall, has been blunt about how seriously the state is treating that piece of it. Threatening public officials, witnesses, or anyone connected to this investigation isn't just ugly online behavior, he said. It's a criminal act, full stop. Separately, roughly 60 people have been formally interviewed as part of the underlying investigation so far, a real reflection of how many people were scattered across Horn Island and the water around it that afternoon. Governor Tate Reeves has publicly placed blame for that hostility on Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton directly, accusing them of stoking division for their own benefit. When Reeves made his first public remarks on the case at all, weeks earlier, he never mentioned Nolan by name and offered no condolences to his parents. He spent the statement accusing Crump of lying about the facts of the case and about Mississippi itself. Whatever the merits of that criticism, The omission became its own small story. One more example of how completely this case has split into camps that can't agree on the same starting point. Crump's team hasn't backed down either. They've stood by their argument that cases like this one tend to get investigated differently depending on who's at the center of them. That framing has placed Nolan's case inside a much larger, much older national conversation about how missing and dead black teenagers get covered compared to their white peers, one Reeves and Crump are now having in public, whether either man intended to or not. Stack it up: a judge under federal scrutiny for threats made against her, a bystander suing to protect his name, a mother fighting harassment tied to her job, a reward now on the table from inside the friend group itself, and a sitting governor and a national civil rights attorney publicly blaming each other for the temperature of the entire case. Almost none of it answers the only question that actually matters. The grand jury referral is still pending. District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath has said every unnatural or suspicious death in Jackson County goes before a grand jury as routine procedure, and that Nolan's case is being handled no differently, but that referral can't happen until the Sheriff's Department considers its investigation complete, and there's no public timeline for when that will be. It's worth understanding, in practical terms, what that referral decides. A grand jury doesn't determine guilt. Its only job is to weigh whatever evidence prosecutors present and decide whether there's enough to formally charge someone with a crime. If it declines to indict anyone, that doesn't necessarily mean investigators found nothing troubling, only that what they found didn't clear the bar for criminal charges. If it does indict, that outcome wouldn't automatically mean homicide either. Grand juries can return charges on anything connected to a death investigation: evidence tampering, false statements to law enforcement, obstruction, all the way up to homicide, depending on what the evidence supports. Right now, with the sheriff's office still working and the state's report still sealed, there's no way to know which of those outcomes, if any, this case is heading toward. The state's autopsy is finished but sealed, which means the most complete forensic picture of what happened to Nolan currently sits in exactly one office, unseen, until it's presented to that jury. The joint phone inspection both sides have discussed for weeks remains, per the family's own legal team, a tentative agreement rather than a scheduled reality. Toxicology results from both the state and independent examinations still haven't been released. What's shifted is how much is now acknowledged publicly without them. Hudson himself has said drinking was happening broadly through the crowd that day, Nolan included, describing it as an ordinary part of a holiday gathering rather than anything unusual. That's meaningfully different from an earlier, more anonymous claim of heavy drinking that surfaced through Marine Patrol reporting. This is a named friend, on the record, describing it as normal. Separately, Brandon Tatum has said he's been told drugs may have also been a factor that day, though that claim so far comes second-hand, through Tatum, and hasn't been confirmed through any official document. What none of this does, the drinking or the unconfirmed drug claim, is tell us how impaired anyone actually was, or whether it played any role in what happened next. Until an actual toxicology report becomes public, any more specific claim than that remains exactly that, a claim, not a finding.
The state of Mississippi is trying to reshape the narrative on the Nolan Wells death? Really? So it has been reported that Nolan Wells, witnesses have come forward to say that Nolan Wells was drinking heavily during the day of the 4th of July. As to say, that's why he drowned. Because remember, authorities have already come out and said, even before they did the autopsy, that Nolan Wells drowned. And his mother, Christine Wansley, said that was not good enough for her. That she needed a medical explanation as to what led up to those events of him, if they say he drowned, right? Now let me ask y'all something. Was Nolan Wells the only one on Horn Island with his group of friends that was drinking? Let's go back through that.
And Katie, the young woman multiple accounts agree Nolan was with during his final confirmed hour on the island, still hasn't given a direct, on-camera account in her own words. Everything attributed to her continues to come second-hand, through her family or through other friends. What's actually confirmed, in official terms, is still narrower than a month of national coverage might suggest. Nolan Wells went to Horn Island on July 4th. He was last seen there around 3 that afternoon, in a crowd that had grown to dozens of people. The boat he arrived on left without him at 4:31. His body was found in the water 2 days later. An independent pathologist could not determine how he died. Everything else, who he was really with, why he stayed, whether every account currently on the record is telling the complete truth about that afternoon, remains contested. Underneath the lawyers and the subpoenas and the arrest and the sealed reports, it's worth remembering what this case actually started as. A kid who planned to be back at practice within days, who friends say never really left a room without making someone in it feel noticed. A wide receiver with a real shot at a future in the sport he loved. Someone teachers, coaches, and teammates keep describing the same way, independently, weeks apart, with no reason to have coordinated their stories. Nothing about the last 2 weeks, not the judge, not Edmiston, not the reviews left on his mother's work profile, not the dispute over who Nolan's real friends were, changes who he was before any of this began. It only measures how far this case has traveled from that ordinary 4th of July on the water, and how many more people it's pulled in along the way, most of whom never asked to be part of the story at all. It's worth asking why a case out of a small Gulf Coast county became this large in the first place. Plenty of missing persons cases involving teenagers never make it past local news, regardless of how unresolved the facts underneath them are. Commentators across the political spectrum have pointed to the same pattern for years. Some cases catch fire nationally within hours, and others never do. Who gets that attention often has less to do with the strength of the evidence than with who's willing to keep pushing, who has a camera rolling first, and who the story is about. Whatever combination of those factors applies here, this case did eventually break through. In large part, that's because a family with real resources and a national platform refused to let it quietly close, and because, one by one, people who were actually there chose to speak instead of staying silent. Neither of those things determines what actually happened to Nolan on Horn Island. But together, they're the reason any of us are still talking about it a month later. Christine Wansley put it simply, and it's still the whole case in one sentence. We just want to know what happened and why our baby didn't come home. A month in, that's still the only thing this story owes her. If you think this case still deserves a complete, honest answer, whichever direction that answer points, that's exactly why we keep covering it. Drop what you think actually happened in those 30 minutes on the water in the comments below. We read all of them, and we'll be back the moment there's something real to report. Rest easy, Nolan.